how do you manage your mindset in the face of all the naysayers or the injustice or the other places that are nipping at your heels? How do you stay within the zone?
I've come up with like these tips, knowing when you're operating from a place of fear and knowing that that's not productive, and putting in place what I call fear checks. My business partner, he also came from a working class background and scarcity mindset. It was a problem for us because we could fall into the fear trap, especially when money was running low. We were bootstrapping. So I implemented a practice where we would be discussing something and coming to a decision. I would ask him, I'd say, are we making this decision because we're afraid or because it's the right for our business? If we had 100K in our bank account right now, would the decision be the same or would it be different? That helped us just stop and think instead of just reacting out of fear. And you can apply that to almost anything.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. Here, there's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Hello. We're so glad you're back because Sharon Gillenwater and I have been having some goofy girl talk behind the scenes. And so now it's like, oh no, we have to actually get I wouldn't say too serious, but we're here to bring it. And I think that's what this episode called Scaling Without Selling Out, a $25 million story is really it's honestly, that's the punchline, but we're going to go to the before, because while this all happened, Sharon Gillenwater had described herself as blue collar with a twist. And I really appreciated that because we're going to find out what that twist is. And we're also going to find out how it twisted itself into the story of who and what she was able to accomplish as a woman who created a company that was in an industry that is typically owned and predominantly male, and how she did it without being a jerk. And so I'm so happy to have you here, Sharon. And thank you for everything. Thank you for your book. Thank you for your spirit. Thank you for your comments on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for advocating for women.
And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I want to dig into a little bit of the behind the scenes, because origin stories are always so important. And like I was sharing with you before the show, like I was laughing, I was crying. I mean, in parts of the books you were swearing and like bringing it out as it is. And I would love to understand when you say that, you grew up blue collar, and it was with a twist. What's so twisted about that? Like, tell us why it was not just blue collar. What made it unique of that flavor of upbringing?
Well, so my immediate family was blue collar. My mom and dad didn't go to college, so I was the first generation college student. But my mom had a career. She started working in computer engineering for the government in the 1960s, but that was considered at the time clerical women's work. They were using punch cards, they were feeding them in, it wasn't what it is today. In other words, where you have to have a master's in engineering. But her boss saw her talent and work ethic and sent her to LA to be trained with IBM. And so she continued to move up in the government without any college degree. And when she ended her career, she was working alongside people with master's degrees. So while she was not educated, she did have this career as a woman, which was rare in those days. And I went to a small private school by the beach. She put me in a little private school because she was worried that she couldn't manage my upbringing being a working mother. And so she felt that I would be safest there. And I ended up meeting all these girls, all these friends who, after elementary school, were headed to this very expensive, exclusive school in La Jolla, California for middle and high school. It was a 6-year school. And of course, I wanted to go where my friends were going. And so she ended up, I didn't find this out until years later. She took out loans that she didn't tell my father about in order to send me to that school because there's no way she could afford it on her income. And it just thrust me into the middle of this community full of very wealthy people, very well educated and accomplished people. It was part day school, part boarding school. So there were boarders who were daughters of diplomats and politicians from other countries and entertainers who you would have heard of. So it was, that's the twist. And I ended up riding to school in a Rolls Royce every day because my mother could not get me to school because she had to go to work and it was in the opposite direction. And so she found someone who lived in our area, in our general area, and they agreed to drive me to school and they just happened to have a Rolls Royce. So it was pretty crazy, that push and pull of my two worlds that I was in. And it did have an impact on me for sure.
I was going to ask you this because one of my favorite parts about the book was when your mom, who's the whistleblower, decided that she was going to leave this position after 30 something years out of a conflict in ethics. And
Hmm.
since so much of what you are all about is without selling out, and that means your values, it means your authenticity, it means your relationships and all of those things. I mean, how did that feel for you that here you are having this kind of very, I guess you could say, principled upbringing alongside all this posh and circumstance? I mean, how did that like mesh or not mesh?
Well, I never saw them as being in conflict with one another. I don't think I witnessed anything in that environment that, you know, gave me pause. Um, and I actually never made that connection until you just made it for me. Sometimes that happens. But yeah, I think my upbringing did contribute to my sense of right and wrong. That was clearly demonstrated by my mother, and a lot of my extended family. Um, but I also think it's just inherent to who I am. I've heard that there's something called a justice gene, or people who really get upset about injustice or things that are wrong that need to be righted. And I've always had that. In fact, it kind of drives me crazy, especially in the current day with what we're seeing people getting away with in positions of power. It's very upsetting to me. A lot of people, they can just let it roll off their back, but it's definitely core to who I am. And I can't live with myself whenever I have done something that was, a little shady. I suffer. I can't do it. So I've learned my lesson. I can't live with that.
Mm. In this respect, I think that our DNA is 100% aligned because I was just having this conversation that I get into a very crusader like mode when I see those areas of injustice or I have decided there's a lack of fairness. I get very wound up.
Yeah, I told a story in the book, but it got cut by the editor. And the story was about when I was having to shut down my first startup because the funder essentially pulled the funding and prevented us from suing them by suing us first. And I had to shut down the company because we had raised this funding, we had started to scale up, and then the funding gets pulled. And what happens is you have all these expenses that you cannot pay, and so you have to just shut it down, and you have to negotiate with the individual vendors as to what you're going to pay and what you're not. And there were all kinds of crazy things, like we had signed a year's hosting contract with a server farm, had not even moved our website over there yet, and they wanted me to pay the full year. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I spent several months negotiating with these vendors. And one of the vendors was an individual person who had a little swag company, where they make t-shirts and all kinds of things with your logo on it. And I had ordered probably $3,000 worth of swag from him for our company. And we had received it, we had it. And I kept saying, please invoice us, please invoice us. And he didn't invoice us. And then the company shuts down, and then he invoices me. And so I treated him the same as I treated, a corporation that has a server farm, right? I just said, you're going to have to meet me halfway. I can't pay all this. So I think I paid him $1,000. I thought about that guy for 20 years.
Wow.
And I was just like, that was unfair what I did to him. He was just this one man shop. He probably, didn't even get all of his costs covered. So after I sold the company, I sent him a check. I had to track him down, and I sent him a check with interest and, additional money for it. And I said, I don't know if you remember me, but this has been bugging me for 20 plus years. So please accept this check. And he was very gracious about it, and he accepted it. But that made me feel so, that had been bugging me for so long. So that's just an example. And it might be crazy, but it's just who I am.
You know, maybe somebody would say you were crazy. I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is that there are, what your morals, your ethics, your values are, and at the end of the day, you're the only one that gets to live with them or sleep with them or do any of that. And it kind of leads me right over to the next question, which is, how do you know what to stand for, what to bend for, and what to walk away from? Because this core piece for you is, I mean, and so much of your work and so much of what you've shared in this book is based off of your intuition.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious because intuition doesn't really have a business plan. And it also doesn't have a lot of the structural pieces that most entrepreneurs, well, depends on how you define entrepreneurs, right? That some entrepreneurs really lean into in terms of data or in terms of some of the metrics. So, how does this all kind of metabolize and digest in terms of and making that sure-footed decision or even a shaky decision that you're still okay with?
That is a tough question. You mentioned intuition, right? I do lean on that a lot and my ethics. Um, in terms of bending and walking away, um, I've definitely been forced to bend. And I don't know if you've finished the book, but there's a part at the end where the lawyers made us do some stuff that was really not consistent with the way that we operated the company from a culture standpoint. And it was very upsetting to everybody, including me, but there was no other option.
Mm.
And so I had to give into it, right? It was painful, and all I could do was explain it to the people involved very clearly. give them an opportunity to come up with another solution that I maybe hadn't thought of, and get to the point where we all said, this really sucks, but there's nothing we can do about it. We have to keep moving and, get this deal closed because everyone's going to benefit. But yes, this sucks. And, just I think when you have to bend to something like that, the only way you can do it while holding on to your integrity is to tell the truth about what's happening. So often I see people try to downplay what's happening or try to deny what's happening. That's when you lose your credibility and support.
Mm.
Um, but to put it out there and say, this completely sucks. I am sobbing right now because I'm heartbroken that we're having to do it this way. But we all agree we need to move forward. And so, I, I'm willing to take the hit and the anger so that we can do what we need to do, right? And then as far as walking away, that's just when, it's something that's untenable for you. You just can't accept it. And an example of that is in the book when my first startup, when the funders said, we're going to shut you down because they had a majority on the board. And they came and they said, they met with me and my partner privately, and they said, we'll give you each 100 grand, or your team can have 3 weeks severance. You choose. And we knew we didn't even have to discuss it because we had the same, you should always have a partner who shares your values and you're so connected and so in line with each other that you don't even have to discuss it. You just look at each other and say, yeah, we're taking the severance,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, yeah, and I'm not saying this like, oh, I'm this wonderful person. It's just, what can I live with? And I couldn't live with that. So
So,
it's,
I mean, this whole topic, and clearly, you're coming from the perspective of an entrepreneur and somebody who has been a founder and somebody who has obviously, had tremendous success, not without its friction or its ups and downs. And that so many of the folks that we work with in our executive consultancy, they are struggling to be able to present those ethics in light of the fact that the marketplace gets very noisy and it feels like dog eat dog, and you've got to be able to sometimes suck it up and not necessarily align with a company's values as much as you would want to, because you also have, you know a paycheck that you have to bring in. The climate, as you've already alluded to, is going through a tremendous amount of change, and a lot of what may feel like for many of us as a lot of injustice, whether it be towards women, towards ageism, towards a lot of other, towards AI and other things that people feel like are eating their lunch and more. How do you suggest that we digest all of this and be able to balance between all of these outside influences and so much of what you talk about in your book, which is, not selling out?
well, I'm just one person. I don't know if I can. I was just talking to someone else about this earlier today. Like, um, if you look at the performance of a company like mine versus someone who, another company who subscribes to the notion of like, well, you just hire 20 salespeople, and 3 months you get rid of half of them, and then 3 months after that you get rid of the other half, and you might end up with 5 good ones. My company performs better. My company performed better than those companies. And there's this narrative that's being perpetuated that it has to be that way. You have to do it the way that, I just described. But it's not effective. It's not effective. And people are not disposable. And if you treat them like they're disposable, they are not going to care about the quality of work that they do as much as they would if they loved the culture and respected the leadership and truly cared about the customers. It's just hands down the company that has the great culture promotes a deep care for customers. They're going to win every single time over the money, over the noise and the headlines, the sexy headlines. But people don't believe that yet because there are not enough stories out there like mine. But I talk to people every day who operate the way I did and have built phenomenal small companies and have people who are loyal and have been there forever and are helping them deliver amazing things for their customers. We are all out there. We are all over the place, but we don't get our stories told, and we're not sexy enough.
Mm.
So I
Culture isn't
really,
sexy enough. Head slash
yeah,
being sexier.
yeah, it's sexy, or the drama, no one's making a Netflix special about my company, right? But,
Love
we
it.
get Theranos and we get Uber and we get WeWork and all those
Viewers, yeah.
those clowns, and they keep funding them too. Oh, they're geniuses. Um, I just think it's a crock of BS, frankly. I've done it. One thing that happened when, we struggled for a long time, as I detail in the book, because we were kind of ahead of the market with what we were offering. But once the market caught up, we did quite well, and my partner and I were able to start paying ourselves very well, um, and the business was throwing off quite a bit of cash. Like, we were very profitable, and so we started giving pretty generous bonuses and um, adding new benefits, and we put together our phantom equity plan for when we sold. And he had more of a finance background than I did. And sometimes when you are that outsider without the expertise, you see things. And I would say to him, like, why is everyone so worried about raising the minimum wage? Like, we're making such, like, we're doing well and we're paying ourselves well. Like, I said, do you think all those other CEOs are keeping all the money for themselves? Because it's not that freaking hard. It's not that hard if you're running a good business and then it starts to do well and you manage it properly and you don't spend on crazy things, to pay yourselves well, pay your employees well, keep growing, have the money to invest in your growth. It was hard, but it was not that hard as people make it seem, in the media, where they're talking about, oh, we can't possibly afford to pay people more. Oh, we can't possibly afford to, offer these benefits.
We're
It,
overcomplicating it,
we're
right? Or
overcomplicating it.
underethicating it.
There's just too much noise out there created by dubious actors. And meanwhile, as I mentioned earlier, I talk to entrepreneurs every single day, and they're doing amazing things, and they're sharing the wealth with their teams.
Mm. So one of the things I'd love you to backtrack is on talk to us about boardroom insiders. What is it? What was it? How did it come about? Right, because this was born out of infancy. It's a huge, 40,000 business leaders under this one database,
Mm-hmm.
and well ahead of its time, because there's so many resources now that, I mean, clearly not the same level of depth, but other points of access that could be used. What was it that said to you on instinct or otherwise, hey, you know what? This is in the TED Talk world, this is an idea worth spreading, or this is something that we
Mhm.
really need to double down on. And how was that a mission of yours? How did this thing come about that you stumbled across this and it came to life?
Like many people who become entrepreneurs, it started with solving a problem for some people I was working with. So I got serendipitously pulled into the tech marketing space, being here in the Bay Area, by a former colleague of mine, and just started building this great list of consulting clients from Cisco to Sun to VMware to Google, SAP, all the biggies. I worked for at one time or another as a consultant. And I was mainly working with them on strategy for their big trade shows and also other events that they did. And around 2004, 2005, I started noticing the same ask from a lot of these tech marketers. And they were all explaining to me that the decision making for big tech deals was starting to move up the executive chain at their customers' companies. So whereas before Cisco might have sold to a director of infrastructure, all of a sudden with these deals expanding in size and scope, maybe the CFO or the chief information officer would say, I need to meet with these people and understand what we're about to deploy here and what we're about to spend all this money on. So that terrified the enterprise sales reps who were working on these deals because they were used to talking about speeds and feeds and hardware and technical specifications and benefits. And that's not what the CFO wants to talk about, or the chief information officer for that matter. They want to talk about business value in terms of operational cost savings or accelerating their ability to launch products, things that are going to help them either save money or make money, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And the salespeople did not know how to have those conversations. And so I started out by just working with account teams, say, AT&T account team at Cisco, and profiling the various executives for them, reading earnings call transcripts saying this is what their initiatives are, that these are their challenges. So in order to really make a connection with these folks, you have to connect the dots between what you're offering and what they're trying to accomplish or what their pain points are. And so it started out as a bespoke kind of consulting engagement. And out of that, I created templated deliverables, which I was creating bespoke at the time. And I pretty soon, after working with a number of different clients in the Valley, I'm like, these people are all going after the same 2,500 executives. It's like top 5 C-levels at the Fortune 500. So if I can profile all of these folks and put them in a database and keep it all updated, I can just sit in my pajamas while everybody pays me for these things out of my database. Now, it wasn't that easy at all,
Roger.
but I did build a database. That's the first thing I built. And then years later, as the market kind of caught up to this notion of C-suite selling or C-suite engagement, as it's called, we actually built a software platform that would pull data from our database and slice and dice it in various ways. So the most easy use case was we're having Cisco, we're having a CIO summit. There are 200 CIOs in the world that we really want to get there. And so we want you to show us across those 200 people what are the most common connections, hobbies, um, languages spoken, countries of origin, business initiatives, business challenges. And so our software created a group of real people that our customers were targeting, and they could see across that group all the common threads. And that would help them figure out what kind of content they should have at their event, who their speakers should be. Maybe they would pull some of the speakers from that very group because they had an expertise in something that they wanted to highlight. Um, they could create icebreakers. You imagine you have a round table for 10, and it's like, okay, you guys have 5 minutes to figure out what all 10 of you have in common. And the winner gets, $5,000 for a charity or something. So it enables you to create an experience for those people that facilitates them making connections with each other, which, according to some research I had done, is really what people want when they go to events like that. Those very high level corporate executives who could go anywhere, they get hundreds of boondoggle invitations every year, but they want to go to the ones where they are going to meet a peer who could help them advance in their career or in their business.
I'm in awe. Not, I mean, it's genius. But the thing that I really, really like about this that is so applicable to everyone who's listening is the framework that you offered. You saw a problem that was repetitive, right? They're looking for this, they're targeting the same people over and over and over and over again. And you also created a solution. And so, hello, this is amazing because this is what's happening in everybody's job search. This is what it is to be a professional. So if you say that you're a great problem solver, this is a perfect opportunity to really dive in and say, hey, you know what? There is this problem going on either at this company or in this industry or with this audience or with this widget or with this something. Because once you start seeing either there's a hole in the market or there's a problem with the existing product that's filling the hole, you are on your way. And I think that there is so much practicality to that. And I'm not a big fan of the here resume. Sometimes I think it sounds more like an obituary. And that's because it's so stuck in what I've done, what I've done, what I've done. But the challenge is that people want to know what you're going to do next. And that's not necessarily all mapped out on a perfect job description. It's up to you sitting in that maybe seat or seat that you want to create to identify that based off of the information that you have or the experience that you've been exposed to.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I talk to a lot of students who want to become entrepreneurs when they graduate. And they're like, how do I get an idea? How do I get an idea? And I'm like, well, I hate to tell you this, but the best way is to go get a job doing something and start to learn that industry, start to learn, that function, whatever you're in, and look around for problems that everybody complains about. And
Mm-hmm.
then experiment while you're still there and getting your paycheck. If there's a solution that would solve the problem and also that people would be willing to pay for. And that whole thing can take years and years to do, which it did for me, right? So and to your other point about your resume, the thing about my career is it went all over the place.
Right. I know you talked about being very circuitous, and I was like, oh, I could totally relate to that too.
And what I learned, and you don't really realize this when you're going through it. There's something about being out, and then you can reflect and you can say, oh, that's what happened. Oh, that's what I was doing. I didn't really know I was doing that, but that's what I was doing, or this is how it worked out. And there's tremendous power in being an outsider or a newcomer to an industry because you see things that nobody else sees, and sometimes they're ridiculous, and sometimes there's a good reason for them being the way they are, and it's like, okay, I now see that there's not much we can do about that. But there are other things that it's like, well, why can't we do something about that? Why don't we do it this way? Oh, that will never scale. So, for when I got into this business information industry, this kind of data world, where all the D&Bs and Thomson Reuters and all those companies sit, I was a complete outsider. And I would go to industry conferences, and this was a little bit of a misstep in my opinion, looking back. I should have been going to the industry conferences. I should have been just like with customers or potential
Mhm.
customers. I should have put all my energy with customers and potential customers. And I was putting a lot of energy there, but simultaneously, I was like, I need to hobnob with the people in this new industry I'm breaking into. And I would go to their events and they were perfectly polite, but they would say, this is never going to scale. Or, you use too many human beings to do the work. It's all about data scraping now, right? And I would say to them, okay, but my clients have been using your tools and they still have this problem. You are not solving this problem. So I'm going to create something to solve that problem. And they said, well, it's just not going to scale. And so it's not going to become a going concern, right? But you don't have to scale massively if you're solving the problem and people are paying you to do it. When we sold the company, we were at 5 million annual recurring revenue, and we could have kept going if we wanted to, right? We could have kept growing. That's not nothing, you know. Um, if you say, okay, you don't scale, okay, well, forget it. So now I have something worth 0 million, but I kept going and I ended up with something that somebody bought for 25 million. That's not nothing. And so again, the root of the problem is the stories that are being told and the conventional wisdom that is wrong. Entrepreneurship is, I can only see this much of myself on screen, but it's a huge spectrum. It's like huge. And over on the right, you have the Zuckerbergs and the Sarah Blakeleys and the billion plus club. But then way down at the other side, you have me and a bunch of other people who are making real life-changing wealth for themselves, but just on a small scale, doing it on their own terms and without the um, interference of venture capitalists and other people in the ecosystem who would have you believe that it's impossible to do it without them and have them
Mm.
take 99% of the value that you create with your team.
I feel like we're in some kind of symbiosis here because the last question that I was going to talk to you about was a big part of what you talk about in your book and have alluded to is really navigating the naysayers.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many naysayers. I mean, I've had my fair share too. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, you're crazy. I quit my job when I was at the top of my game, and people are like, oh, you're nuts. And I was like, okay. I mean, and really, I guess the question is, how do you, Sharon, manage your mindset in the face of all the naysayers or the injustice or the other places that are nipping at your heels going, wait a second, it's you're the one who's maybe off, and here's how it's done. How do you stay within the zone?
Well, I just did a whole presentation on that exact topic in London. I hope I can remember everything. I might have to open up my laptop here and bring
I might
up
have to
the.
go with you to London.
um, well, first of all, I would like to just, as an aside, I have heard that story so many times, including in London when I gave this presentation from two women who had left their corporate jobs to start something on their own. I have never had a man come up to me and say that they heard that. If a man quits his high-powered corporate job to become an entrepreneur, people are like, "Ooh, he's running a startup." you know, just an observation. I don't hear that from men. I talk to men and women. I'm not just focused on women. I'm focused on everybody who uh, might need encouragement and confidence building in their entrepreneurial journey. But managing your mindset as an entrepreneur, particularly as a woman entrepreneur, is absolutely critical. It's hard, um, but I've come up with like these tips. that I really did some thinking about it before I created this presentation. I'm not going to bring up the file. I'm just going to try to remember. But the first one, which is very important, because I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of the not a lot, but a few of the naysayers early on for me were people in my own family and friend group, right? And that's hard. So my first recommendation is understand your origins and the origins of your limiting beliefs. If you have to hire a therapist or an executive coach to help you get there, do it, because that's what I did. Like, I didn't think I was a big therapy person, like, I'm fine, I don't need that, right? But I did hire early on, I hired an executive coach because I had terror when I went into client meetings, when I was breaking into the tech industry. I had terrible imposter syndrome. They used so much jargon and I didn't know what any of it meant. And it wasn't as easy then to look up on the internet as it is now. And so every meeting I did, I was just terrorized and exhausted afterwards because I was convinced that they were going to find out that I was green, that I didn't know what I was really doing in that industry. And so I hired this executive coach, and she started asking me all kinds of questions about my family and my upbringing. And I was quite irritated. I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? Well, a lot of what we uncovered is my fear and terror came mainly from my mom, who would question when I would do things like leave a job that was stable, or, well, why are you doing that? That's such a good job. And when I raised venture capital for my first startup, she asked me if I raised it or if my business partner did it. You know, so all of this coming from her was making me feel like she didn't believe in me.
Mm.
And the coach actually had a very similar upbringing than I did, and a mother who also grew up in extreme poverty. Both of our mothers came from similar backgrounds, and we both kind of took off in our careers. And she said, don't you see, you're, she achieved a lot in her life, and now you're going, for the top of Maslow's pyramid here, quitting your job to just start something and hopefully sell it. And it's so far beyond her point of reference that it terrifies her. And she's afraid you're going to fall, and she's afraid you're going to fail. And once I understood it was coming from a place of love, not, oh, I don't believe in you, I could let it go. It was like almost instantaneous. And so understanding the origin of those things is so important. And once you do understand it, it's going to keep coming up. It doesn't go away permanently. But when it does come up, you go, oh, hello, I recognize you. Goodbye. And you just swat it away. And it's so easy to do. So that's one of the things. And then another thing is like, knowing when you're operating from a place of fear and knowing that that's not uh, productive, and putting in place what I call fear checks. My business partner in Boardroom Insiders, he also came from a working class background and scarcity mindset. And so that was the only area where we were more the same than different.
Mhm.
But it was a problem for us because we could fall into the fear trap, especially when money was running low. We were bootstrapping. And so I implemented a practice where, we would be discussing something and coming to a decision. And I would ask him, I'd say, are we making this decision because we're afraid or because it's the right thing for our business? If we had 100K in our bank account right now, would the decision be the same or would it be different? And that helped us just stop and think instead of just reacting out of
Mm.
fear. And you can apply that to almost anything.
Everywhere,
Yeah.
everywhere. I mean, I see this on such a consistent basis because whether it's fear around not being good enough, which we all have to some degree, fear of success, or we have to learn how to stay in the zone so that we aren't putting whatever that reactive reaction is in the driver's seat. And one of the things that we were talking about in our executive group yesterday is one of the great quotes from Elizabeth Gilbert, God bless Elizabeth
Mhm.
Gilbert, that, fear gets a seat, but not a vote. And I
That's
thought
great.
I thought that was really great. It was like, okay, you can have a place, but I'm not gonna necessarily let you take over. And I'm just thrilled to pieces that you created your own internal spine around this, and to be able to stay the course, because not only are you helping so many people, men and women, I think you are such a lightning rod for folks in their careers who may want to break away from corporate, or people that can apply a lot of these rules to their careers as they are looking to up level in the next organization. You've been a tremendous inspiration to me, because I am a little entrepreneur. And I was also told that
Yes.
there was going to be no room in this space for me. And I just simply ignored it. And I think sometimes there's a place for that too.
Yes, there is. Yeah. Yeah.
Sharon
Uh,
Gillenwater, I also wanted to make a shout out to your book, because this is such a fun book. It's called Scaling with Soul. I'm going to share it right here. And also, it's how I built and sold a $25 million tech company without being an a-hole. And for those of you who love to read, or love stories, or just love to learn about other people who have actually cracked the nut and did it with some integrity and ethics, this is your book. I mean, this is amazing. I was laughing out loud. I was having such a good time getting to know you and your Cali background and all the things that were happening back in the 60s and your bell bottoms. And I think that that's so much fun to be able to hear it straight from somebody who isn't trying to be all highbrow or anything like that. So I wanted to thank you for this book, and mostly thank you for you. And we will be continuing other conversations, I hope, because you're just such a great role model, and I appreciate so much that you had a big win for all that sweat equity that you put in along the way. It's really exciting to see those rewards for somebody else.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and for giving a shout out to the book. And, we have to get the word out to more entrepreneurs that if I can do it, they can do it.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody for listening today. This is I think we're like at 92 or 93 on our episodes. So we're approaching 100. This has been a true labor of love. There's no bots behind here, or we don't have any massive sponsors yet, but we will. And I want to thank you also for your reviews. We're over 100 reviews on Apple Podcast, and that helps us. So please continue. Please share this with any of your friends in the career space or professional space, however you want to define it. And please subscribe to Career Blast and a Half. Signing off today. Thank you again, Sharon. Sharon, we'll also put links to where people can find you and where they can buy your book. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next Career Blast and a Half. Most of all, thank you for you.